The email sat in her inbox for 4 days before she opened it. She'd seen the sender name the morning it arrived. The subject line had been enough, and she'd closed the app and put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and gone about the rest of her Tuesday as though she hadn't seen it. She'd made breakfast and packed lunches and answered 3 work messages and driven to the office and come home and made dinner and watched something with Paul that she couldn't have told you the plot of an hour later. And the whole time, the email was sitting in her inbox unopened, and she was thinking about it in the specific way of someone who already knows what they're going to do about something and isn't ready to make it official. On the 4th day, her daughter Sophie found her at the kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning, coffee untouched, phone face up for once. "What is that?" Sophie said. "An email," Ellen said. Sophie looked at her mother's face. She was 16 and had, in the past year, developed an unsettling ability to read rooms. She sat down across from Ellen in the chair nobody sat in before 7 a.m. "Is it bad news?" "No," Ellen said. "It's good news." Sophie waited. "It's too complicated to explain before school," Ellen said. Her daughter looked at the untouched coffee and at the email on the phone and at her mother's face. "Okay," she said, "but it's been on the counter for 4 days." Ellen looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I've seen you not look at it," Sophie said, "which is different from not seeing it." She got up and poured herself cereal and went to get her bag, and Ellen sat at the table with the phone and the email and the specific feeling of being understood by her own child in a way she wasn't sure she was ready for. She opened the email. If this kind of story, not a dramatic crisis, just a woman at a kitchen table with a decision she keeps almost making, lands somewhere for you, subscribe. We look at real human situations here, the ones that don't announce themselves. Her name was Ellen Marsh, and she was 44. And she had been, in various forms, almost starting something for about 12 years. The something had different names depending on the year. In her early 30s, it had been the ceramics classes she'd signed up for twice and canceled twice because something came up that was more immediately necessary. In her mid-30s, it had been the small catering idea she'd mapped out in a notebook that was still in the drawer of the nightstand, detailed and specific and 12 years old. In her late 30s, it had been the food writing she'd started and stopped and started and stopped, the 6 pieces she'd published in small local publications, and the folder of drafts that had accumulated on her laptop in the way that things accumulate when you return to them in the margins of other things. What she actually did, she managed procurement for a mid-sized restaurant supply company in Cincinnati. She was good at it. It was not the wrong life. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself. She'd made choices, and the choices had produced things she valued. Paul, who was a good man and had been her good man for 17 years. Sophie, the house, the friendships she'd maintained. The life that was, by any honest accounting, a full life. But the food writing was still in the folder, and the notebook with the catering idea was still in the drawer, and the email in her inbox was from a woman named Carol Briggs, who ran a regional food publication she'd admired for years, who was launching a new series on small food businesses in the Midwest and was looking for someone to write 3 features, substantial ones, reported, with real access, and had found Ellen's 6 published pieces and wanted to know if she was interested. Real pieces, real publication, real timeline. The email had arrived on a Tuesday, and by Saturday, Ellen had drafted 3 responses. One that said yes, enthusiastically, one that said she was interested but had some questions about timing, and one that said she was honored but couldn't commit at this time due to existing obligations. The third one was the best written. She hadn't sent any of them. Paul found out about the email on Saturday evening. Not because she told him. She should have told him, she knew that. She'd been planning to tell him for 4 days, and the planning had accumulated into a weight that made telling harder, not easier, because by now the not telling required explanation along with the telling. He found out because Sophie mentioned it at dinner. "Mom got an email from a magazine," Sophie said. She said it in the way of teenagers who have decided the adults are being inefficient and someone needs to move things along. Paul looked at Ellen. Ellen looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at her bowl. "What magazine?" Paul said. "The one about food," Sophie said. "The one she always mentions." Paul looked at Ellen. She could see him organizing something, the timeline of the week, the evenings when she'd seemed present but elsewhere. He was putting it together. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She told him plainly, which was easier now that the decision had been made to tell it. 3 pieces, regional food businesses, the publication she'd mentioned probably 100 times over the years as the one she'd want to write for if she were ever going to. Paul was quiet. "And?" he said. "And I haven't responded yet." He looked at her. Why not? She could have given him the reasons. They were all real. The project at work that was in a critical phase, the thing coming up with his mother's situation, Sophie's schedule in the spring, the general insufficiency of available time. She had the list memorized. She'd been rehearsing it for 4 days. "I don't know," she said instead. He looked at her for a long moment. "Ellen," he said. He said her name the way he said it when he was about to say something real. "You've been talking about doing something like this for as long as I've known you." "I know." "And someone is asking you to do it." "I know." "So what is happening?" he said. Not impatiently, just genuinely trying to understand. She looked at her bowl. "I keep finding reasons why the timing is wrong," she said. "Is the timing wrong?" She thought about the work project, the thing with his mother. Sophie's spring. The assembled list of real things. "The timing is what it always is," she said. "There's always something." He was quiet. "I know," he said. She called her sister Beth that Sunday. Beth lived in Columbus, and they talked every couple of weeks in the way of sisters who are close without being in each other's daily lives. Ellen told her about the email, and Beth said, "Obviously say yes." And Ellen said it wasn't obvious, and Beth said, "Why not?" And Ellen explained the list. Beth listened to the list. "Okay," she said. "Can I say something?" "Yes," Ellen said. "You've been giving me versions of that list for 12 years, Beth said. "The items change, but the list stays." Ellen didn't say anything. "Remember when you signed up for the ceramics class? That was different." "It's always different," Beth said. "The reason is always different. The result is always the same." A pause. "What are you actually afraid of?" Ellen looked at the backyard through the kitchen window. The Sunday morning, the still bare March yard. "I don't know," she said. "Yes, you do," Beth said. She said it gently, but she said it. Ellen looked at the yard for a long time. "That it won't work," she said finally. "That I'll say yes and I'll do it and it'll be ordinary. And I'll have given up the version where I still could have been good at it." She paused. "The version where I just hadn't tried yet." Beth was quiet. "Keeping it in the drawer doesn't keep it safe," she said. "It just keeps it small." Ellen closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "It also keeps you... I don't know how to say this without it being a thing." "Say it," Ellen said. "It keeps you a little bit absent," Beth said. "The part of you that's thinking about the thing you're not doing. That part isn't really here." Ellen opened her eyes. She thought about Sophie at the kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning. "I've seen you not look at it, which is different from not seeing it." The conversation with her boss, Tom, was on a Monday. She'd asked for 20 minutes, and he'd given her his office, and she'd sat across from him and said she'd been offered 3 freelance pieces for a regional publication, significant time commitment over 4 months, and she'd like to discuss whether that was compatible with her current role. Tom had looked at her for a moment. "Is this something you've wanted to do?" he said. "For a while," she said. He looked at his desk. "When does it start?" She told him the timeline. He asked 2 questions about overlap with the project. She answered honestly. "Workable," he said, "as long as the project stays on track." She looked at him. "I thought you'd have more concerns," she said. "I have some," he said. "But you've been here 9 years and you've never asked for anything for yourself that I can remember." He looked at her steadily. "That's actually a little bit of information, Ellen." She thought about that on the drive home. The hard conversation was with Paul's mother. Margaret was 71 and had recently started needing more than she'd previously needed. Not a crisis, not anything requiring intervention, just the incremental increase of a person moving through her mid-70s who needed more driving, more company, more someone available to call when the small things came up. Ellen had been that person for the past 8 months, gradually, in the way that things become structure before they're decided. She told Margaret on a Wednesday afternoon, over tea at Margaret's kitchen table, that she'd been offered some writing work, that she was going to take it, and that her availability over the next 4 months was going to be somewhat reduced. Margaret looked at her. "Writing work," she said. "Food writing," Ellen said. "Features for a publication I've wanted to write for." "I didn't know you wrote," Margaret said. Ellen looked at her hands. "A little. Not as much as I've wanted to." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "What does Paul think?" "He thinks I should do it," Ellen said. "He's right," Margaret said. Ellen looked up. "I've leaned on you more than I should," Margaret said simply. She said it as a fact, without drama. "I knew I was doing it. You made it easy to lean." She looked at her tea. "I'll manage the months you're busy. I managed before." "I'm not disappearing," Ellen said. "I'm just doing something for yourself," Margaret said. "That's allowed." A pause. "It's supposed to be allowed." Ellen sat at the kitchen table and felt something she'd been holding release slightly, in the specific way of a thing you've been bracing against that turns out not to need bracing against. "I thought you'd be upset," she said. "I thought you would have asked sooner," Margaret said. She sat down to write the response to Carol on a Thursday night. Paul was in the other room. Sophie was upstairs. The house had the specific evening quality of a house in which everyone was accounted for and doing their own thing. She opened the laptop. She opened Carol's email. She opened the draft she'd written and deleted twice. She started a new one. "Dear Carol," she wrote. "Thank you for reaching out about the series." She stopped. She thought about the notebook in the drawer. 12 years old. She thought about the ceramics classes she'd canceled, the catering idea she'd mapped out, the folder of drafts. She thought about all the versions of herself that had been parked in the margins of her life while the main road had been other things. She thought about what Beth had said. Keeping it in the drawer doesn't keep it safe. It just keeps it small. She thought about Sophie at the kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning. "I've seen you not look at it." She wrote the email. She said yes. She asked 3 practical questions about timeline and access. She said she was genuinely excited about the series. She sent it before she could draft a 4th version. She sat for a moment with the sent confirmation. Paul came to the doorway. "Done?" he said. "Sent," she said. He nodded. He came in and put his hand briefly on her shoulder, not an elaborate gesture, just a hand on her shoulder, and went back to the other room. She sat there for a while. The email was sent. Nothing had changed yet. The house was the same house. The evening was the same evening. The work project was still in a critical phase. Margaret was still going to need more than before. Sophie's spring was still complicated. The email was sent anyway. The conversation that changed things happened on a Friday evening 3 weeks later. Ellen was at the desk in the bedroom with her notes from the first interview she'd done for the first piece. She'd driven to a small bakery an hour outside Cincinnati, a woman who'd started it in her late 40s after 20 years in corporate accounting. She'd been there for 3 hours and come home with more material than she'd expected and the specific, energized tiredness of a day that had used her well. Sophie knocked on the open door. "Can I ask you something?" Ellen turned from the screen. "Sure." Sophie came in and sat on the edge of the bed. She had the look she got when she was working up to something. Not nervous, just deliberate. "About the youth arts program," she said. Ellen knew about the program. Sophie had mentioned it 3 months ago and then hadn't mentioned it again, which was its own kind of information. "I looked it up again," Sophie said. "The deadline is next month, for the summer intensive." "Okay," Ellen said. "I wasn't going to apply," Sophie said. She said it plainly. "I kept telling myself it was too much time. I had other things. I wasn't sure I was good enough yet." Ellen waited. "And then you did the email thing," Sophie said, "with the magazine." Ellen looked at her daughter. "You almost didn't," Sophie said. "I know you almost didn't. And then you did. And I've watched you these past few weeks, the interview days, and you seem—" She paused. "Different. Like you're here more." Ellen sat with that. "You want to apply," she said. "I want to apply," Sophie said. "I've wanted to for months. I just kept finding reasons it was a bad idea." She looked at Ellen. "I think I learned that somewhere." Ellen looked at her daughter, 16, in the doorway of the bedroom where Ellen had spent a decade talking herself out of things, looking at her with the clear-eyed directness of someone who had been watching a behavior long enough to name it. "I think I learned that somewhere." She thought about something Paul had said once, early in their marriage, when she'd canceled the ceramics class the first time. He'd said it gently. "The things you don't do are also teaching." She'd heard it and agreed with it, and then kept not doing anyway, and it had become background, and she hadn't thought about it specifically again until right now. "Apply," Ellen said. "Even if it's a lot of time? Even if—" "Apply," Ellen said again. "We'll figure out the rest when we know if you got in." Sophie looked at her. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She got up to go. At the door, she stopped. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you sent the email," Sophie said. She went back to her room. Ellen turned back to the desk. The notes from the bakery interview. The woman who'd started at 46 after 20 years doing the other thing. Ellen had asked her, at the end of the interview, if she'd had any regrets about waiting so long. The woman had thought about it for a real minute. "I regret the waiting," she'd said. "Not the starting." The first piece ran in May. She read it on a Tuesday morning, on her phone at the kitchen table, with coffee that was actually hot this time. The piece was about the bakery outside Cincinnati, the woman, the accounting career, the starting at 46. It was the best thing Ellen had written. She knew that the way you know things about your own work that you don't say out loud, because saying them out loud feels like tempting something. Paul read it in the evening and said, "This is good, Ellen. This is really good." She said, "I know." Not performing modesty, not deflecting, just, "I know." The specific, simple claiming of a thing she'd made. Sophie had gotten into the program. The news had come in March, and Ellen had watched her daughter receive it. The careful calibration of a person who isn't sure they're allowed to be as happy as they are, and thought, "I recognize that." She'd said, "You can just be happy." Sophie had laughed. The program started in June. Sophie had been talking about it with the specific quality of a person who has finally let themselves want something all the way. The talking about it had a different register than her normal conversation, slightly more alive in it, slightly more her. Ellen recognized that too. She wrote the second piece in April. A couple who ran a small fermentation business out of a converted garage who had started it with $2,000 and had been at it for 5 years. She spent 2 afternoons with them and came home with the same feeling as the bakery, the energized tiredness of having been fully used. She was writing at the desk in the bedroom when Paul came to the door. "How's it going?" "Good," she said. "Really good, actually." He looked at her for a moment. "You seem different," he said. "Different how?" He thought about it. "Present," he said. "Like you're fully here instead of partly here and partly somewhere else." She thought about what Beth had said. "The part of you that's thinking about the thing you're not doing, that part isn't really here." "I was somewhere else for a long time," she said. "I know," he said. "I missed the rest of you." She looked at him. "Why didn't you say something?" He came and sat on the bed, the way he sat when a conversation was going to be real. "I didn't know how," he said. "I knew something was not wrong, just incomplete. I thought it was something you had to arrive at yourself." He paused. "I wasn't wrong about that. I just maybe could have said, 'I see it.'" "Say it now," she said. "I see it," he said. "I've always seen it. I've been waiting for you to let it be actual." She turned back to the screen. "I'm letting it be actual," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm glad." The third piece was the hardest. It was about a woman who had started a small food education nonprofit at 58, after a career in teaching, after raising 3 kids, after her marriage had ended. She'd done it with very little money and a great deal of conviction, and it had become, in 7 years, something genuinely meaningful in the neighborhood it served. Ellen sat across from her in a community kitchen in Columbus and asked her questions for 3 hours. Near the end, she asked the question she'd been building toward. "Was there a moment when you almost didn't start?" The woman looked at her. She had the look of someone who had been asked exactly the right question. "Every day for about 2 years, she said. "Every single day I had a reason not to start. The kids needed things. The money wasn't there. The timing wasn't right. I didn't know enough yet." She paused. "I had a list. It was a good list. Every item on it was real." "What happened to the list?" "My youngest daughter," the woman said. "She wanted to do something, a teaching program, something she'd been talking about for a year, and she said to me, 'I think I'll wait until I'm more ready.' And I heard it. I heard it, and I recognized where she'd learned it." She looked at Ellen directly. "I started the nonprofit the following month." Ellen wrote this down. She wrote it, and she thought about Sophie at the kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning. She thought about, "I think I learned that somewhere." She thought about the notebook in the nightstand drawer, 12 years old, and the ceramics class she'd canceled twice, and the folder of drafts that had been waiting. She thought about the woman across from her, who had started at 58 because her daughter had said something that made the cost visible. "Did it work?" Ellen said. The woman looked around the kitchen, at the things on the walls, the kids' drawings, the program schedule for the spring semester. "It worked," she said. "Not perfectly. Nothing works perfectly." She looked at Ellen. "But it worked enough that I can't imagine the version of my life where I kept waiting." Ellen sat with that. She looked at her notes. She looked at the recorder on the table between them. She thought about Carol's email, sitting in her inbox for 4 days. She thought about the 3 drafts. Yes, questions, honored but unable to commit. She thought about which one she'd sent. She thought about Sophie's acceptance letter, sitting on the kitchen counter, which Sophie had left there because she wanted to see it every time she walked past. She thought about Paul at the door of the bedroom. "I see it. I've been waiting for you to let it be actual." She thought about the thing she'd told herself for 12 years, the thing that had lived underneath every item on every list. that wanting something for herself while people who needed her were still nearby was the same as taking something from them. She thought about the woman across from her, who had started at 58 because her daughter had needed to see her try. She thought about the specific thing her daughter had said. "In our family, we don't do that." She'd thought it was a statement about the family. She understood now it was a question. She was the one answering it. The third piece ran in July. It was about the woman in the community kitchen, about starting at 58, about the daughter who had said she thought she'd wait until she was more ready. Ellen read it at the kitchen table in the morning with hot coffee, and Sophie across from her, eating cereal, reading something on her phone. Sophie put her phone down. "This one's really good, Mom." Ellen looked at the piece on her screen. "It's the best one," she said. "How do you know?" Ellen thought about how to explain it. "Because I understood what she was talking about," she said, "from the inside." Sophie looked at her. Then she looked back at her cereal. "The program starts in 3 weeks," she said. It was not a statement about the program. It was something else. "I know," Ellen said. "I'm nervous," Sophie said. "I know," Ellen said. "You're going to go anyway." Sophie looked at her. "Yeah," she said. "I am." Ellen drank her coffee. The kitchen was ordinary in the way that kitchens are ordinary in the morning. Cereal boxes, sunlight through the window, the particular sound of a house waking up. The same kitchen where she'd sat for 4 days not opening an email. The same table. She thought about 12 years of lists. She thought about the notebook in the drawer and the ceramics class and the folder of drafts. She thought about what was in the folder now. 3 pieces published, the notes for a 4th she'd been thinking about, the beginning of something that was actual rather than possible. She thought about what it had cost to start. Not much in the end, some inconvenience, some discomfort, a few conversations that had been harder than she'd expected and less hard than she'd feared. A project at work that had stayed on track without her constant management of it. A mother-in-law who had managed a few months of reduced availability and was fine. She thought about what it would have cost not to start. She was already looking at part of the answer across the kitchen table. Her daughter, nervous, going anyway. "In our family, we don't do that." The sentence was over. The answer to it was here, in the kitchen, on Tuesday morning. In this family, they did. The notebook was still in the nightstand drawer. She'd thought about taking it out, updating it, turning the 12-year-old idea into something current. She hadn't yet. One thing at a time. But she knew it was there, and she thought about it differently now. Not as evidence of a life she hadn't lived, but as a thing that had been waiting with more patience than it was owed. She'd get to it. She didn't know when. She'd been saying that for 12 years, and this time it was different, because this time she had evidence that she meant it. 3 pieces, a byline, a woman in a community kitchen who had started at 58 and couldn't imagine the version where she'd kept waiting. She couldn't imagine that version either. She'd been living it for 12 years. She remembered it clearly. She preferred this one. Sophie came home from the first week of the summer program on a Friday evening with the particular quality of a person who has been thoroughly used in a good way. She dropped her bag in the entryway and came to the kitchen and sat down and said nothing for a moment. "How was it?" Ellen said. Sophie looked at the table, then she looked up. "It was the best week I've had," she said. "Maybe ever." Ellen looked at her daughter. "Good," she said. The same word Paul had used the night she'd sent the email. "Good. I'm glad." The same thing said back in a different kitchen. Sophie got up to get something from the fridge. Ellen watched her move around the kitchen with the ease of a person who had been somewhere good and brought it back with them. She thought, this is what it looks like. This is the thing that doesn't get made if the email stays unopened. Not the published pieces, not the byline. This. Her daughter in the kitchen, Friday evening. Best week, maybe ever. She turned back to the notes on her laptop. She had a fourth idea she'd been thinking about. A woman in Dayton who ran a small community farm. The interview wasn't scheduled yet. She needed to make the call. She picked up her phone. She made the call. If this story landed somewhere for you, maybe a thing you've been almost starting, maybe a notebook in a drawer, maybe a version of yourself you've been keeping in the margins, leave a word in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Sometimes just naming it is the first step. We'll be here.